2 Eastern time. Going to be joined by Arash Markazi of the Los Angeles Times to talk about the situation at USC. We'll talk about the Utah game, talk about Clay Helton. Saying Arash is as tapped in as anybody as far as USC is concerned. Then we're going to have J.G. Tate on from the USC, I should say, from the Auburn rival site. And we'll address some of the things that I broke on Twitter last night concerning the status of Gus Malzahn going forward. Is Bob Stoops in play? I've been told that if Gus Malzahn is not able to beat Alabama, if Auburn has 4 or 5 wins, this is my speculation. All I can tell you is, as a matter of fact, Bob Stoops is the top target for Auburn super booster, Jimmy Rain, right? And I was told by a source that Alabama is the key. If Malzahn's able to beat Alabama, that's kind of a get out of jail free card for Gus, because his job does indeed hang by a thread. It hangs in the balance, right? Not quite as much as perhaps a Clay Helton, which I just mentioned earlier on the show. Clay Helton now is week to week. We're all week to week, right? But Clay Helton literally is, his job is week to week at USC. If they're embarrassed, I've been told by a source close to the situation, if SC is embarrassed, if they're blown out, Helton's gone. That's against Utah. And the key situation to look at going forward, if that doesn't happen after the Utah game, is the bye week before Notre Dame. That's where you're most likely to see an immediate change, right? So that's what I'm reporting right now on this show. You've got to come into this show if you're going to get some of this proprietary information, breaking news and whatnot. And I appreciate you commenting. You can comment on the show. You can hop on screen with me when we get that opportunity. We've got guests coming up here in the next half hour or so. Arash Markazi is going to be joining us. And this is a lot of fun, dude. This is something that I want to thank the people at FanCred really for making this happen, because now I'm able to report all of the breaking news, all of the unique takes that we bring to the table with more nuance. You can connect to me, and you can actually interact with me on the screen with the fan line. I mean, this is cutting edge stuff. It doesn't exist. So you have this premium product that's free, this information, these amazing guests, breaking news, and you can come on the screen or comment in real time. That's what this is all about. That's why I love doing it. That's why I'm doing it. And we're not going anywhere, folks. So we're going to bring in Arash Markazi of the Los Angeles Times. Nobody more plugged in the media in Los Angeles to USC, literally, behind the scenes. He's out front every day in the LA Times. He's got that amazing dot portrait, that artwork that they use. That would be my dream someday, to have something like that done for me. Well, Arash has it. And I've known him since his days when he was columnist and an editor at the Daily Trojan at USC. So we're going to get him up here in a second and talk about what's going on there. I want to get his impressions of Chip Kelly, because I made a pronouncement about Chip Kelly, kind of a final pronouncement from my perspective on Twitter over the weekend. I think Chip Kelly is committing coaching malpractice on UCLA, and that it's absolutely time for UCLA to cut bait. I don't know the financial circumstances of it. I really don't care. I do know that Casey Wasserman, who's going to make that call. We talked about Jimmy Rain in Auburn, right? Making the call, big money guy. We talk about Rick Caruso, big billionaire real estate developer, chairman of the board of trustees at USC. Wayne Hughes, founder, CEO of Public Storage. Those are the two guys, fight on, right? Those are the two guys at USC who are making the call, ultimately. Now, if enough people inside that USC administration push back, who knows? All bets are off. But that's the way it's always gone, right? So we talked about Jim at UCLA is Casey Wasserman. He's the guy that makes the final call on the hires and fires. And Arash, man, I really appreciate you hopping on. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
And so I've been talking a lot about, I don't want to necessarily get into a deep dive in all the details of what I've been reporting, but you've got a game against Utah coming up for USC that at least from my sources, they indicate Clay Helton is not on a season-to-season evaluation now. He's literally on a game-by-game evaluation as to whether or not he keeps his job. I mean, what's your impression of that situation?
My assessment is that they're not going to pull the plug during the season on him just because of what he's done. He's been a real stabilizing force during the whole, Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian debacles. But I don't think there's a scenario, and I said this last week when they were 2-0, when they could have been 3-0, where he keeps his job. I mean, they have their mindset on a big name hire. And I think, it's going to be a new athletic director, new president, new regime. So I definitely think there's going to be a new coach. And certainly if they go 2-2, we are definitely looking at a coaching change. But Brooks, I guess I would just be surprised if that happened during the season unless the wheels completely came off.
Right. And I think a big point that you made that goes contrary to what I've been hearing, but a point that you just made was no athletic director.
Yeah.
So when you have no athletic director, it's a power grab between the administration. You've got Carol Folt there. And what I've been told, Arash, is she wants no part of Urban Meyer. That's my reporting. But and then you've got, of course, the former players who are extremely influential, particularly some of those guys, they shall remain nameless. But there's a lot of former players. They're in a position. And I think my athletic director, and I don't think any of those former players are going to be the athletic director, unlike, what we had with Lynn Swann. I think those days are more than likely over, which is a good thing for SC. But right now, and then you've got the super boosters like a Rick Caruso, like a Wayne Hughes. So it's not a really great situation to necessarily make a hire. But from what I'm hearing, maybe Helton, perhaps after the Utah game, if they get embarrassed, or maybe the bye week before Notre Dame. But I do subscribe to a certain extent to what you're saying. If you don't have an athletic director, I mean, how can you make that call?
Exactly. I mean, just from a perception standpoint, you need an athletic director for their first big move, for their first big hire, to have the athletic director in place and then the head coach. So, I mean, listen, I would expect for them to move on that pretty quickly as well. So bring him the AD, and then at that point, go to the head coach.
So this is another thing I've been hearing, and we're visiting with Arash Markazi of the Los Angeles Times, and I want to get your impression of this. The USC Trojans have never had an African-American head coach. And I've been hearing from some of my sources that there may be, and I know Urban Meyer, of course, and I'm the guy. I mean, we're all talking about that. And to me, if that's not a perfect hire under the circumstances, I don't know what is. And it would be huge for LA, USC, the Pac-12, college football. I acknowledge all of that. But I think it's more, the administration at USC, not all that enamored or excited. The administration, that is, the top of the administration, in bringing in Urban Meyer, and that I'm hearing there's a push for an African-American head coach. I mean, is that something that you think could come into play, or do you think Urban Meyer is a lock for this job?
Well, I think Urban Meyer is certainly the talk of the school, and as you know, Brooks, he's going to be on the field and at the game Friday night.
Right.
That's definitely going to make some news.
But listen, and you'll be there. By the way, you'll be there
with Reggie Bush, by the way, for his first time there in a while. But listen, that's been a push for quite some time, whether it was Kevin Sumlin, whether it was James Franklin. Again, not just for the perception. I mean, these are qualified head coaches. And so a school like USC, given where it is located, for them to never have had an African-American head coach is crazy. So, but I just don't think that is the determining factor. I definitely think that they want the most qualified head coach, and if that head coach happens to be a African American head coach, that's fantastic. I mean, that was the feeling before, when it was people wanted James Franklin, or they wanted Kevin Sumlin prior to that. So I have not heard that, but I'm going to be at the game Friday talking to some people, so we will see.
Well, and I think that the athletic director, I mean, if they bring in someone, and I'm not saying that Lynn Swann was illegitimate, but if they bring somebody in from another school who's eminently qualified, I think that may have, you would like to think in this case. I mean, it hasn't happened that way at USC in the past, and maybe that's why we're kind of in that situation. It's a little bit of the elephant in the room. I want to ask you quickly about Chip Kelly. I said I thought just watching that game against Oklahoma, it's gotten to the point, from my perspective, this is coaching malpractice.
Yeah.
And we're really to the point of no return. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it was amazing in his press conference when he basically said, you all thought I was going to run the same scheme I ran before. And it's like, yeah, we thought you were going to run the same scheme you ran when you had all that success.
Right.
I mean, that's normally the way it works. But Brooks, it was so depressing there last Saturday, 50,000 people, half empty Rose Bowl, more than half the crowd rooting for the opposing team. And it's going to get worse, Brooks. I mean, that was their biggest crowd of the season. So you go towards these games in October, November. I mean, you're going to get 20,000. You're going to see that this year. You're going to get a 20,000 crowd. It's going to be, because here's the thing. You could give out free tickets, but you know what a production it is to get to the Rose Bowl, driving there, parking on the golf course or whatever. I mean, so if you gave me a ticket to go watch what's happening there, there's no way that I would go. So it's going to get worse, and I think you've touched on this show. He doesn't want to recruit. He doesn't want to shake hands. He doesn't want to talk to the boosters. He doesn't want to do the things that you should do to be a successful head coach. I mean, he doesn't want to recruit. I mean, You look at these recruiting classes. They are not Chip Kelly, this is why we brought you in classes. These are regular run-of-the-mill UCLA classes. It's a joke.
Well, I think when you look at the offensive line, that's a sub-FBS offensive line. And when you look at the quarterback, clearly, I think a lot more talented than people give him credit for.
Yeah.
But he's raw, and he has no business starting right now. So you've got, and then you look at the sideline. I think that's the biggest thing for me is it's blank. Now, I know that's what happened in Oregon.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do? It's so ironic. You thought I was going to run what I ran when I was successful. No, right. Right. I mean, I feel like if you recruited gangbusters and you ran that offense, you could be to bring UCLA back to national prominence. But I also wanted to ask you one more thing. Now, the students weren't there for the Oklahoma game, right? And from what I understand, they don't start till September 23rd, right? Which is unbelievable. But UCLA is one of those schools that starts really late.
Quarter system, not semester, yeah.
So, but remember, the Rose Bowl's way off campus.
It is.
It's a huge investment in your time. So is that overrated, you think?
Yeah, listen, they're not going to show up. I mean, what have they done if you're a student and it's a Saturday afternoon? And again, like you said, the Rose Bowl is not on campus. So I could go spend Saturday afternoon in Malibu or Santa Monica or just like in Westwood. There's so much to do in Westwood. You want me to drive to Pasadena? You want me to go to the Rose Bowl to watch maybe Brooks? I mean, this could be one of the worst teams in college football. I mean, you're thinking about UCLA, Los Angeles. This could be in all of the teams in Division I. This could be one of the worst teams. So there's no way. It's not going to matter. They're not going to show up.
Now I want to talk about the Rams briefly because I'm going back and forth about the Rams. I mean, what are your thoughts on where they are right now?
I think they're fine. Listen, they haven't been impressive through the first 2 weeks of the season. I do think that has something to do with not playing a single down during the preseason. So I'm not calling these preseason games, but they have won their first 2 games, maybe not as impressively as people would have liked, but I don't know if they're going to be as impressive as they were last season at the beginning of the year when they were scoring like 40 some odd points per game. So, I think they're fine. I think, again, maybe not as impressive as people would like, but I think that they will be okay.
Chargers, is that just a blip or could this be serious for them? Could they have problems this year? Maybe not be the Chargers that we're used to seeing. And where is Phillip Rivers with that?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of a blip just because of that second half. I mean, I thought they found a way not to play their best football, but to take the lead with the lead in the third quarter, but then just really not effective in the second half of that game. And they're missing a lot of players, Brooks. And so, I mean, that at some point that gets to you, whether it's Okung, whether it's James, whether it's Helton. I mean, these are big name players that they don't have right now.
Boy, and they could have used them against the Lions. Yeah. Arash, man, I really appreciate you hopping on, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. That's Arash Markazi, Los Angeles Times, giving us the scoop on what he understands. And, man, that's valuable info because you heard what I was talking about with USC, what I'm hearing, and the fact that they're refocusing on an African-American coach as a possibility. And And Rash came back and said, look, they've been looking at that in the past. It was a possibility. But of course, in the past, we had essentially a country club in the athletic department. I mean, the college admission scandal epicenter emanates out of the USC athletic department. So, and I think that's one of the reasons why we didn't have an African-American coach, because it was an old boy network, very much so, coming out of the Pat Hayden administration. And he kind of set the tone. I'm not saying Pat Hayden's against having a black coach. That's not what I mean. But I mean, is you've got this built-in kind of incestuous situation to the extreme at USC. And that's why you end up with the college admission scandal, going through the athletic department. What's astonishing to me is how we haven't had any names come out in terms of the USC football program, because the USC football program was directly involved in that college admission scandal with Rick Singer. They've been given a break. There have been no names out there. There should be names out there. And that's actually something that I'm looking into right now, because the USC football program is involved in that scandal. And so we're going to go down to Auburn and talk to J.G. Tate about the Auburn Tigers. And we all like to call them War Eagles, but they're the Tigers. And we're going to address some of the things that I talked about. I want to get his perspective on my breaking news about Jimmy Rain. And, it's not necessarily breaking news in that region of the country. This has been brought up. And Jay, I really appreciate the time. Thanks so much for stopping by.
It's a pleasure. Definitely. How you doing?
So I'm doing great. And I know that my thought process on Jimmy Rain, not necessarily a new thing as it pertains to Bob Stoops, but what's your perspective on the prospect of a Bob Stoops emergence if Gus Malzahn ends up with a 3, 4, 5 loss season?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, at this point, 3-0, team's looking okay. So I don't know. So there's a lot of talk down here right now about what's going to happen with Malzahn, and if things go poorly, what they're going to do. But I'll tell you what, I mean, 10 months ago, last October, last November, early December, I had definitely heard Bob Stoops' name. And I think there was definitely an effort afoot here by some people, a small group, to try to see if they could at least get that as a consideration from Stoops. And there were people that definitely wanted to get rid of Gus. But I think that buyout was an albatross. And I don't think people in general were on board. That the higher ups, specifically the president and a couple important members of the board of trustees, were not on board with that. And ultimately that little coup, if you want to call it, fell through. At this point right now, there are definitely people that don't like Gus within Auburn. Those same people that probably conspired to try to get rid of him last year probably still have an unfavorable opinion of him. But I don't know if there's active push right now to get something done.
What's interesting about USC, and I think it might apply to Auburn, it might not, is if you look at Clay Helton, even when Clay Helton wins, he's using this air raid offense. And you've got the alumni, you've got the longtime USC fans, they're not happy with that, even when they're winning. Is there a little bit of that with Gus?
I don't know. I feel like the offense is fine. I think the identity is fine. Interesting, Clay is an Auburn guy. He actually played quarterback at Auburn, and people here still like him a lot. And he's a good dude. Yeah, I understand what you're saying about USC and maybe just not being a match philosophically. I think they're fine with that part of Gus. The problem is that he has this tendency to get into the same problems from a strategic standpoint. I mean, for the folks who've been watching Auburn for years, they go down to LSU and they have trouble every single time. A couple years ago, they ran 17 consecutive plays up the middle when they were ahead and ended up losing that game. In 2017, they got super hot, and then they laid an egg in the SEC championship game. They lost to UCF in the bowl game. There's just this feeling among some Auburn folks, I will say a significant minority, that it's just always the same with Gus. I don't necessarily think it's a philosophical thing. It's a performance thing. So,
and I've heard in my reporting, something that I haven't mentioned yet, I'm going to mention right now, is we talked about the buyout. We talked about all of those things. And of course, Bob Stoops, you'd like to get him. You look at the coaching landscape, what's out there. What I've been told is Tennessee is not a possibility because the roster is a disaster. The recruiting is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Now, when you've got Kirby Smart. It wasn't always that way, right? But you got Saban, you've got Kirby, you've got Dabo. It's like the Bermuda Triangle for Tennessee. They're locked up there because they don't have all of that talent in the state that they have in the other states, and they can't just come down and poach anymore. But from what I'm hearing, because there's no interest really in Tennessee, there's no interest in Florida State, and Bob Stoops is not going to go to USC, that kind of leaves Auburn. Now, that said, I've also heard that Jimmy Raines has been coordinating, let's just say, through third parties, conversations with people attached to prominent assistant coaches. And I wanted to ask you that, and I haven't reported that, I'm bringing that up right now,
Sure.
that Jimmy Raines has been sending feelers out to prominent assistant coaches. And I was wondering, is that something that could, let's say they have, and I hate to do this because we don't know yet. They could run the table.
Sure.
Who knows? They could have they could have a great season. And I want to ask you about Beau Nicks in a second in the A&M game. But is that something, let's say they had a 5-loss season that could be sold on the Auburn fans?
Yes. I mean, if they were to lose 4 or 5 games, there's going to be a lot of Auburn folks that would want to get something done. And then in that point, if you've already been working towards something, it would certainly help. But I want to remind everybody this about Jimmy Raines. Very influential person. I think you mentioned on Twitter that he was the richest person in the state. I don't know that for sure, but I mean, he definitely is wealthy. But
it's been reported. It's been reported.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't, I'm not into financial stuff, but years ago, he was a very visual feature of his company's marketing campaign. He runs like a pressure treated wood company down here called Yellowwood. And so he did a lot of the commercials himself. And through the years, he's met a lot of these people. So like Bob Stoops is somebody that he knows personally through the years, just working with him through business. And I'm sure there's a lot of other coaches that he would have on his commercials or he would have some other business relationship with. So the fact that he's talking to coaches, to me, it's not just some regular old dude just cold calling folks. It's a guy who's been around for 30 or 40 years, and he's built up these business relationships with them. So he may talk to them normally even when things are going well at all.
But what I was going to say was kind of the point of my question was that they have been canvassing, Jimmy Raines has been canvassing prominent assistant coaches, up and coming coaches, maybe coaches that weren't in the category that you just described. And I was wondering, is that something that could be sold on the Auburn fan as a possible head coach?
Depends on the situation. It just depends on if people. Again, we're going way down the road here because they're and like you mentioned,
overreaction. That's what I do.
Yeah,
right?
I know that. I know it's your gig. I get it, but it's got to go further down the road before they see it. And if it comes to a point where Gus has got to go, they're going to want somebody bigger than a prominent assistant coach at Auburn. They're going to feel like they need that. And you mentioned the Bermuda Triangle earlier. Think about Auburn's perspective. Okay, you got Alabama, who probably has the greatest all-time college coach at this point, right? And they're recruiting at an incredibly high level. Clemson, which Auburn and Clemson have a long relationship. I mean, Clemson's the reason that they have the colors they do is because it came from Auburn. I mean, really? It's considered Auburn, but Auburn with a lake. So Clemson's really good. Georgia's really good now. These are the 3 programs that like Auburn considers its, closest arch rivals.
It's like the Alamo.
And you're just surrounded by great programs.
Yeah, right.
And it makes things really hard.
So and we're visiting with J.G. Tate of the Auburn Rivals website. And I wanted to talk to you about Beau Nicks because he's kind of an X factor. At least that's my impression. Yeah. It's an amazing story, 18 years old. And now, I think a lot of people have said this is kind of an elimination game with Texas A&M. What are your thoughts on Beau? Give us a little primer on Beau Nicks.
Right. Beau was just basically born to be this guy. His dad played quarterback at Auburn. Patrick Nicks was very good, won a whole lot of games, including some great games at Florida that people still talk about today. He's a 5-star recruit who was always going to go to Auburn, and he was kind of made for this. There's pictures I'm sure you've seen during the games where when Cam Newton won the national championship game, there's a picture of Beau Nicks right on the outside of a picture with Cam and his trophy. I mean, he was that kid. He was growing up wearing the Auburn colors and cheering for Auburn. He's a very mature kid. Generally, I think of him as a very accurate passer. I mean, he certainly was in high school. So far in college, not quite as much, but still, I mean, it's a big jump to go from 5A football to big-time college football. So his accuracy's been a little bit off. I thought in the Oregon game, which is his very first game, I thought he fleed the pocket a little too much, and he went sideways instead of trusting his protection. And he got a little bit better in these last 2 games, but they haven't been against great opponents. I agree with you to say that this Texas A&M game is basically an elimination game. Auburn's got, at Florida coming up, They've got Mississippi State, which I think everyone's trashing now because of the Kansas State game, but I still think that's a good program. And they've got LSU coming up. They got Arkansas coming up. They got to be on the road the whole month of October. So if they don't get something going right now, the chances of them being able to dig out of that hole, they're getting smaller by the day.
When you talk about Texas A&M and their schedule, I mean, you can certainly make the case that Auburn has every bit as difficult a schedule as Texas A&M. I mean, what do you think specifically of this matchup? What kind of chances do you think Auburn has in that game?
Well, I think Texas A&M is a good ball club. I don't know that they're a great ball club because Kellen Mond is just kind of all over the map. He'll have a great game and then he'll have a bad game, and sometimes I just think he's too herky-jerky. He lacks that smoothness you would expect from a guy who's been playing as long as he has. I think that defense is going to cause some trouble, specifically Auburn's ability to run the football with those linebackers. A&M's linebackers, I don't hear many people talk about these guys, but they are extremely fast. They fit the run as fast as anybody I've seen in the college game this year, and that's going to be a problem for Auburn because they try to run these inside zones, and those linebackers are going to crush them. They're going to have to come up with some different ideas about how to get the ball out because if they can't run, they're not going to score. That's the way Malzahn's offenses work. And I just think they're going to have to come up with something different than they've shown to this point to try to beat A&M consistently running the football.
We talked about Alabama, and that was part of the report. And from what I understand, Jimmy Rain is somewhat obsessed with beating Alabama. Of course, that's a big rivalry, and everybody is. That's what college football is. I went to Georgia. We're obsessed with Florida and Georgia Tech. So, but I wanted to ask you specifically about Alabama. We watched the game against South Carolina. My impression was, along with a lot of other people, that game probably should have been closer. It wasn't well coached by Will Muschamp. That's my opinion. What do you think of Alabama?
Well, I think they're very good. I think they're losing people on defense. I think this latest loss, the kid that went down in the South Carolina game, that's a big loss for them. And
so they got three guys down now.
That's three, right?
Right.
So at some point, I mean, I know it's next man up at Alabama, but at some point you're regressing a little bit from a personnel perspective. And I thought South Carolina did some things to them that I didn't expect them to do. They had a little more success than I was expecting. So I don't know if Alabama's quite as good as they were on the defensive side of the ball, but you've always got to trust Tua. He's something else.
Man, I really appreciate you stopping in, Jay. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right, be good, man.
Stay in touch.
See ya.
That's JG Tate, auburnsports.com. Auburn Rivals on Twitter. He's also at JG Tate, JAYGTATE. Great to talk to him and get a firsthand perspective in Auburn of the Auburn Tigers, what he thought about the reporting that we've done. And nobody is disputing it. I mean, because it's true. You know, that's the bottom line. We can sit here and talk about who we think is going to win. You know, is Bob Stoops going to be interested? Guesswork like that. But I can tell you for a fact that Jimmy Rain is interested. So it's like the Jimmy Rain show today, isn't it? We said his name like 47,000 times. So we're going to continue to have these kinds of conversations. If you're new to the show, right, you can come on screen with me when we have that opportunity, and I'm going to take some questions. And we're going to take comments. We're going to read them on the air. This is an interactive show. That's one of the key points of this show on the fan line. You can see that fan line icon, all right? Upper right-hand corner of your screen. I want you to come in and hang out with us every day from noon to about 1:30, 2 o'clock. Depends on the guest lineup. Depends on what we're talking about. I'm going to get back to working the phones, and you need to follow my Twitter. Follow the FanCred Twitter at the FANCRED. This is Sports by Brooks on FanCred. That's what we call it. That's the show. Really be doing this. This is our third week. We do it every single day, and we've got a big guest lineup coming tomorrow, and I mean some big names. NFL. This isn't just college football. It's not just pro football. We're going to talk. I want to get into some boxing with some of my guys. When we get into the baseball playoffs, we're going to look at that. You know, basketball. Don't think it's just college football, just NFL. Now, right now, of course, heading into the weekend, it is all NFL, all college football, especially when you have breaking news here on Sports by Brooks on FanCred. So keep your eyes open, stay on the app, check out some of the amazing communities. It's wide open for you to get going on the FanCred app and start posting and start connecting with fellow Auburn fans. This is a really cool community. It's an amazing app, and you're going to have all of these broadcasts coming at you, including this show. And of course, we have the fourth quarter live shows with the Patriots, with the Eagles, you know, some of the big personalities in those cities, with the Steelers and with the Cowboys. All right. So I want you to come back tomorrow. Join me. I want you to jump in to the communities here on the app and also comment. Want to get your feedback. And hopefully you'll get a chance to join me on screen right here in the future. And from Los Angeles, this is Brooks Melchior, and this has been Sports by Brooks on FanCred.